So now that we've learned SOHCAHTOA and we know how to set up trig ratios for right triangles, we're going to take the next step and we're going to use them to solve right triangles, to find missing sides of triangles. So here's the setup. If we have a right triangle and you know one of the angles and one of the sides, you can use SOHCAHTOA to find either of the other two sides. So let's start with a picture here. Let's say this is a right triangle. And let's say I tell you one of the angles. Maybe I tell you this angle right here is 60 degrees. And I tell you one of the sides. Maybe this side over here is 15. It doesn't matter which angle or which side I gave you. I just kind of picked them randomly. If we know one of the angles and one of the sides, then you can find either of the other two sides. I could tell you what this side right here is, or what this side right here is. That's what we're going to do today. We're going to use a little bit of given information, one side and one angle, to find the other sides. So let's talk about how to do that. Here are the steps to that problem. Number one, you're going to label your triangle. We've been labeling opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse, just like when we did SOHCAHTOA the first time. Now, once you've done that, you have to look at the information in the problem. You take the side that you're trying to find and the side that you already know, and you ask yourself, which sides are those? Are they opposite? Are they adjacent? Are they hypotenuse? And that's how you're going to pick which trig function to use. So I said here, for example, if I know the hypotenuse, that's h, and I'm trying to find the opposite, that's o, I would look up here. I would say, well, I have O and H. That means this is a sign question. Or either the other two. If I knew the adjacent and wanted to find hypotenuse, A and H, I would use cosine. Or if I wanted to find opposite and I knew adjacent, O and A, I would use tangent. So you look at the two sides, the one that you know already and the one that you're trying to find, you ask what sides they are, and then you use those to pick either sine, cosine, or tangent. So then you set up the equation, and this is how we do it. First of all, you just write the, so like, let's say in the last example, I said, okay, I decided it's opposite and hypotenuse, so I'm going to use sine. So I write sine here. Now, after you write your trig function, after the trig function always comes the angle. And remember, we were given one angle in the problem. That's where you put the number. So in the example I used earlier, I said it was 60 degrees. Then sine of 60 equals, and you do SOHCAHTOA, opposite over hypotenuse. Now, one of them you're going to know, and one of them is going to be the thing that you're trying to find, probably x. So it might look something like this, maybe 12 over x, or something like that. That's how you set up the equation. You write the trig function first. The angle always comes after the trig function, and then that equals your ratio. It could be opposite over hypotenuse for sine, adjacent over hypotenuse for cosine, or opposite over adjacent for tangent. So once you have your equation, you're going to use a calculator to evaluate the trig function part. So my last one said sine of 60 degrees. I would grab a calculator and type sine of 60 and turn it into a decimal. Once I get that number, I solve for x. All right, so let's try two of them out, actually. This is our first example for today. We're going to solve for x, and if you notice, I've kind of drawn the picture for you that described what we were talking about. We have a right triangle. I told you what one of the angles is, it's 21. I told you what one of the sides is, it's 10, and we're trying to find another side. I called it x. So let's start by labeling our sides. We said that's always first. We always do that first. So the right angle is on the bottom left there. If you go across the triangle, the 10 would be the hypotenuse. Now, because I'm talking about the 21, that makes this blank side over here opposite, because opposite means opposite from the angle that we're talking about. And that would mean x is adjacent. So to answer this question, I want to use adjacent and hypotenuse. The one side you are given and the one side you're trying to find. I can't use opposite in this question because I don't have anything to use for it. I don't have a number or a variable there. So the one that has a number and the one that has a variable are the ones you're using. So if we look at SOHCAHTOA, if I want to use adjacent and hypotenuse, this is going to be a cosine question. And that's the important first step. That's what we're learning today, is looking at the picture and realizing which trig function you want to use, sine, cosine, or tangent. So now we set up the equation. We picked our trig function, cosine. Remember, every time, no matter what, after you write sine, cosine, or tangent, comes the angle. And for this one, it's 21 degrees. Then you actually use SOHCAHTOA. Cosine from CAH, cosine equals adjacent, which is x, over hypotenuse, which is 10. So we set up our equation. All we have to do is solve it. If I'm looking at x, I have x over 10. Now remember, fractions mean divided by. So really what I have there is x divided by 10. And if I want to cancel out dividing, I use multiplying. So I'm going to multiply both sides of this equation times 10, which will cancel out that 10 right there. Actually, you know what? Let me back up a step. I forgot there was something we were supposed to do before that. First, I want to use my calculator. So let's grab our calculator and see what cosine of 21 is. So I type it into my calculator and it comes out to about 0.933. I forgot to do that step first. Okay, now I want to do what I started on the last step. Now I want to solve for x. And now I multiply by 10 because I want to cancel that 10 out. And for my final answer, x equals 10 times 0.933, which actually just moves the decimal place over once, and our answer is about 9.33. So that's how these problems work with SOHCAHTOA. You have to look at the picture and figure out which trig function you want to use, sine, cosine, or tangent. Then you have to set up an equation, and then you actually have to solve the equation. So there's a few steps here. Let's do one more, and in fact, what I did for our last example, I gave you almost the same one, but I moved it. I moved the 10 over. I said solve for y. I was going to change it to a y, but I actually left it an x. So let's solve for x. Now the numbers are exactly the same. I just took the 10 and I moved it from the top of the triangle over. All right, so let's start the question off the same way though. Let's label our sides. So the I find the right angle and I go across to find the hypotenuse. The 21 is right here, so the 10 is opposite, and that would make the x be adjacent. So this time, I want to use opposite and adjacent. See, this time because I moved the 10, it's not the hypotenuse anymore, it's a different side. So let's look at SOHCAHTOA again. Now this time I want to use the O and the A. That makes this one a tangent question. And that's the decision every time. Look at the triangle, ask yourself, what side am I trying to find? What side do I already know? From SOHCAHTOA, which trig function do I use? Now when you set up the question, as soon as you write your trig function, after it comes the angle, it's 21 degrees again, because I copied the last question. And then tangent equals opposite over adjacent. Opposite is 10, and adjacent is x. Now let me use my calculator again. Let's type tangent 21, see what we get. I got 0.383 this time. Now the other thing about this question, Last time it was flipped. The x was on top and it was x divided by 10. It was very simple. We solved in one step. We just multiplied by 10. Now when the x is in the denominator, it's actually a little bit harder. There's 2 steps to doing it. There's a couple ways, but I think since we just did this with similar triangles, a good way to do it is if you take your decimal and you put it over 1. That's how you make a number into a fraction, is put it over 1. Then you can cross multiply. So then you do, just like when we did similar triangles, you do 0.383 times x equals 10 times 1, which is just 10. Now you can finish the question by dividing by the number in front of x, which is 0.383. Now that cancels, and x equals, this will be our final answer. I'm going to use my calculator again, but it's going to be 10 divided by 0.383. And it's about 26.1. So those 2 examples were mostly the same. You have to look at the picture, you have to use SOHCAHTOA to pick a trig function and set up your equation. It's a little bit different at the end. It depends on whether the variable is on top or bottom. When you set up your ratio, if the x is on top, it's pretty easy. You can solve by just multiplying by whatever is on bottom. But if the x is in the denominator, it's a little trickier. It takes 2 steps instead of 1.